So tonight, I really want to go deep into what a professional identity is, how to develop it, and then how to protect it. In addition to this talk, I'm going to pull in a bunch of different perspectives from my other panelists, as well as answer any questions from the audience. So just right off the bat, what is a professional identity? So this is me, in case you can't tell. And a lot of people think this is what a professional identity is. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. As Paul said, I'm also a coach. I do some consulting and then speaking as well. But to me, this isn't really my professional identity. I believe your professional identity is who you are within your profession. Another way to put that is that your professional identity starts with your personal identity, which consists of your purpose, your core values, your skills or your gift, and then your priorities. So your professional identity really exists within the confines of your personal identity. And I can't emphasize this enough. This is repetitive on purpose because it's so important. If you don't take anything else away from this talk, I hope you take this away. This is one of my favorite quotes. There can be no happiness if the things we believe in are different than the things that we do. So who you are and what you believe in is the core of your professional identity and serves as the internal compass for what you do. And what you do is the other half of your professional identity. So within medicine, there's a lot of things that we do, right? It starts with direct clinical care, whether you have a specialty or subspecialty, perhaps even a niche within that specialty, how much of your time and effort goes into your clinical work. And there's also the work that's kind of adjacent to clinical care. If you're in academics, that's research and education, perhaps administration, specialty society involvement. You want to be involved in industry or pharma, medical legal work. The list kind of goes on and on. And then outside of medicine, the options are really endless. You can basically do whatever you want. And those are just the bare bones of what a professional identity consists of. But how do you get to the point of knowing what that is? How do you go about defining or developing your own professional identity? I think there are some key tools that help with that. Most of us kind of start with this one, mentoring. And I kind of call this the magnifying glass approach, where your outlook on your career comes through the lens of a mentor. One of the challenges of mentoring relationships are that mentors are often born out of reverence or admiration, which leads to a certain power dynamic and potential conflict of interest. Seeing things through the mentor's perspective naturally will narrow some of the possibilities, but may also lead you to be kind of married to their perspective and maybe even not want to let them down. So that conflict of interest kind of can come into play, particularly when your ideas differ. The second one is sponsorship, and that's kind of what all of us aspire to, right? Like sponsors are often a subset of our mentors, but they help launch us to a new space. I kind of call that the binoculars approach, to where you're looking ahead to what's next. Because sponsors are often, but not always, mentors, they can have some of the same power dynamics and conflict of interest issues that I discussed before. But even if your sponsors are not mentors of yours, the nature of sponsorship is such that there still could be some power dynamics at play. Often a sponsor is kind of vouching for you or endorsing you for something, and therefore their name is kind of in it and they have some skin in the game too. So some of those same concerns can play out with sponsorship as they do with mentorship. The third tool is self-education. And I think in the age of the internet and social media, this is becoming more and more prevalent in our career development. Independent learning is just so much easier with those tools than it used to be in the past. And everywhere you look, there's webinars, there's courses, there's things to read and learn about on your own. But this, I call this the watering can approach, where you're kind of feeding yourself in terms of development. The biggest challenge with self-education is that it requires a lot of discipline and intentionality and consistency to keep that going. So the last tool is coaching. And I would define coaching as a structured process of self-reflection and goal setting that is done through a neutral party, that neutral party being the coach. One of the big differences between coaching and mentoring is that that relationship does not have the same power dynamics that I described before, because the coach is not someone that you typically revere like you would a mentor. They truly are a neutral party. They also function through your lens rather than through the mentor's lens, for instance. And the strategy is really centered around the client's desires, but with an added level of accountability, as this is a service that you typically pay for. One of the great things about coaching and the coaching process is that it's a mirror, right? It forces us to reflect on ourselves, which is oftentimes what we like to do the least. So those tools are really only useful through some sort of strategy. And here's an approach that I have thought of and kind of recommend. I think, as I said before, developing your professional identity really starts with your personal identity, and that starts with identifying your core values and purpose. That takes a lot of introspection. I think a lot of times we think our core values go without saying, but I think that it's really worth taking the time to put that into words and to figure out what that is, because it'll help you down the line. It's a lot harder than it sounds. There's a lot of books, exercises, quizzes, and things of that nature that can help you with this. One of the books that I read that I thought was really, really helpful is this book called U-Turn by Ashley Stahl, which is really about using your core values to guide you to your dream career. So anyone that's interested, I would recommend this book. So just as an example, I read that book and I kind of figured out what my core values are, which are authenticity, freedom, integrity, growth, and excellence. And then from that, I figured out what my purpose is. Everything that I do is done with the goal of empowering other people to be their best self. And so from that, you can go to the second step in the strategy, which is figure out how to make decisions that are aligned with your core values. And when I say decisions, I'm talking about all the decisions that we make, like what job you take, what new opportunity you consider, even what task within your job you take, the way that you practice, etc. I think it's important to figure out how you best make decisions. We often just talk about decision making as if there's one way to do it, but there are a lot of different ways to think about our decisions. And I think it's important to reflect back on how you best do that when you're in a time that's not stressful, so that when you are under stress, you're able to make decisions that are aligned with your values a little easier. And one way to do that is to create a personal tool to help you. One book that I read about decision making that was very helpful to me is this book called Yes or No by Jeff Scheinebarger. Again, another book that I would recommend. And from this and other things that I've learned, I came up with this personal decision making tool for myself. So for every opportunity that I consider, I go through this list of 5 questions. Does it fit my personal mission? Is this something that I will enjoy? Is it something that's new or different that will challenge me? Will I get to hone a skill that is important to me? And does it elevate my profile? And that's kind of an intentionally vague question that can mean anything from, does it put me in the right networks? Does it put me in front of the right audiences, et cetera? Once I've answered those questions, I need 3 out of the 5 to be yes for it to be something that I continue to consider. And if it's not, or if it is, excuse me, then I figure out what I need to say no to in order to make room for this. So I view this decision-making tool through a lens that I already have a full plate, and additional opportunities are important enough for me to potentially delay or displace another opportunity. The next step, I think, that's important is before you make any decision, gather enough information. Too often in medicine, especially surgery, we're so used to making decisions rapidly that we often make decisions without thinking about it, and that can get you into a lot of trouble. So for every opportunity you have, I would recommend getting as much information as possible. You can use your mentor to help with that, self-education, but also just asking questions of the people who are presenting the opportunity to you, and understand that the decisions that we make that are not clinical generally do not require urgency. You have the right and probably responsibility to take time to think things through clearly. And if something feels urgent to you, I would take a step back to figure out why that is. A lot of times urgency is either manufactured, meaning it comes from another party due to either their disorganization or maybe even manipulation. It can come from decision-making fatigue, meaning I'm gonna make this new decision quickly just to get it off my own plate. And that goes back to that decision-making tool. That's one reason why coming up with your decision-making tool is very helpful, because when you're under stress and you're tired and you're having to make a lot of decisions and you don't want to make another decision, you now have a value-based decision tool that will help you hopefully prevent you from making the wrong decision under duress. The third thing that often leads us to feel urgency in decision-making is something I heard another coach refer to as obligatory gratitude. And that's the feeling that you must do something swiftly out of gratitude to someone else for something they've done for you in the past. And a lot of times that's how we get ourselves into trouble. And that's why mentorship is such a challenging relationship to manage while you're trying to develop your own journey in your career. Be aware of all of these things and how they impact your personal feeling of urgency, and try to control them as much as you can. I think the next step in identity development is the most important one, which is you got to try something, right? You can think about things, you can learn about things forever, but until you try something, you really won't know how it works out. So take a risk and be willing to try things, but in doing that, continually reassess. And that reassessment is rooted in the things that you did earlier, which is number one, your core values and your purpose, and then number two, your decision-making strategy. If you continually reassess things as you try them, you won't find yourself continually getting stuck in things that you don't like. The last part of the strategy is focus. While it's important to expose yourself and try new things to help kind of figure out what that identity is, I think that it's important for us to remember that the best career and life, I think, is curated. It's not accidental. So in that state of reassessment, you actually have to then make another decision on whether you're going to continue things that are suited to you, or whether you're going to get rid of the things that are not working so well for you. So just as important as how to develop a personal identity is when to develop your personal identity. And I think there are some critical times for professional identity assessment or reassessment. The first is at the very beginning of your career. I think that that can help set the tone for your career if you identify your core values and principles and your purpose early on, because it will, like I said earlier, act as that compass for you going forward. Of course, your professional identity is going to be something that's dynamic. It's not fixed, but at least having some idea at the beginning will, I think, help keep things from running out of control, because you will have that or those guiding principles early on. The second critical time, I think, is when you're unhappy, whether that's dissatisfaction with a job or actual burnout. Oftentimes, those things result from a conflict between what you believe in and what you're doing. And when you sense that conflict, you sense internal tension. That's how you are signaled to that. So that's a great time to reassess your professional identity. The third time is any time of actual change or even just potential change, considering a new opportunity, a new role, a new job, or even a new career. Because as you move into something new, it may be that your professional identity changes with that. And then the last one is at the end of your career. Retirement is a time where we all have to redefine what our professional identity is or was, and what happens to it as we move into the next phase of our lives. So I told you the what, the how, and the when, but can it really be that simple? Of course it's not that simple. Nothing is ever that simple, right? There are potential threats to your professional identity that I think you should be aware of and mitigate as much as you can. So the first one is self-limiting beliefs. A lot of times we tend to think too small and too narrow with respect to possibilities for what our professional identity can be. And recognizing that and allowing yourself to dream bigger and take risks, I think will help mitigate some self-limiting beliefs. Also being aware that in medicine, we have a really early commitment to a singular path. Think about it, most of us commit to our surgical careers 10 years or more before we actually are doing that job. And in that, we often struggle to change directions when our desires and our priorities change. So don't allow your premature commitment to singularity confine you to a fixed professional identity. Understand that your identity can change over time as you do. And then the last one is making assumptions about what's allowed. I always joke with my friends that there's no actual rules to this. I remember when I first started my job and I kind of thought like, oh, there's rules to how you can practice and how much time you can take off and what activities you can do professionally outside of work. But the reality is there are no rules. There are so many different ways to do this thing called medicine, and the rules are within our own heads. So once we get rid of that, the possibilities become endless. The second threat to our professional identities is the expectations of others. A lot of that comes through mentoring, and that's the conflict of interest I was discussing earlier. A lot of times, and with good intention, I think our mentors have an idea of what our career should look like, what path we should take, but sometimes that differs from what we actually want to do. And we have to learn to let go of other people's expectations as we grow in our own careers. Oftentimes, these expectations are really a projection of their desires onto you, and sometimes it's for their own personal gain. And I don't say that to mean that there's any malintent. I just think that's just the reality of having some skin in the game. So being aware of that sometimes these expectations do not serve you, will hopefully allow you to realize that you're in practice and you get to choose what your career looks like. And the last and perhaps the biggest threat to our professional identity is burnout. And I think that's because it's the hardest one to address. Again, burnout really results from doing things that are not in line with our personal values. One way to try to mitigate that is to try to put yourself in a position where you remain aligned with your personal values. Recognizing this tension within yourself and the presence of burnout early and making changes to address that is the best way to mitigate this one. So in summary, using your personal values or your core values as your guiding principles will lay the foundation for your professional identity. And then making sure that what you do aligns with those values will allow your professional identity to persist. But be intentional about defining and redefining what this identity is over time. Continually reassess this as your own personal priorities and boundaries change. And with that, I would like to awaken our panel for some discussion. So first, I'll start off with a question for each of you. At what point did you start thinking about who you are within your profession? I'll start with Jeff.
Well, in the model that you outlined, it felt a little bit more defined by the predetermined. And so I didn't really start reassessing and reevaluating my professional identity until approximately 10, 15 years ago. And I've been in my career for about 25.
And when you said predetermined, what do you mean?
Well, so I decided I wanted to be a doctor when I was really little. And I think both good and bad. I think good, it actually gave me the drive and determination to do that. And even though along the way I did have opportunities to reassess, I didn't really entertain those alternatives very much. And then, went on this path of high school, college, medical school, and job. I had the fortunate opportunity to study abroad between the two, and it kind of gave me a refresh, but it didn't really deflect me from my path. And then, so it was really a little bit about that. This is what I'm going to do, in your algorithm, it's 10 years from now, but for me, it was almost like, 20 years from now. And I sort of stayed on that path, not necessarily sure that I was enjoying what I was doing. And I think I did in retrospect, but I think that there were certainly bumps along the way. And then for sure into my career, it seemed like a predetermined path of what, an orthopedic surgeon was supposed to be like. Maybe you subspecialize, but it was pretty much determined by, I think, everybody but me. And it was at that later point of sort of experiencing either burnout or, that sense that things weren't aligned with my values that I needed to reassess.
What about you, Richard?
So I guess I'd break it down into, medicine and then like plastic surgery. So medicine, somewhat like Jeff, my dad was a family doctor, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed sort of going into the office sometimes with him and watching some of the interactions. The interesting thing though is that when I was in high school and I actually was sort of thinking about, well, maybe I want to be a marine biologist. I had this thing for Jacques Cousteau. And the high school guidance counselor basically told me, don't bother thinking about anything else because, you've got the grades to go into medicine, so you're just going to do it. So, I just went along that path. And when I went into plastics, when I think sort of midway through or getting towards the end of my residency, speaking with the chair of plastics, I didn't go at it in a deliberate fashion. You know, I sort of took what was said as the proverbial gospel. You know, I was told, well, if you want to be in an academic institution, you need to be a great researcher, you need to be a great clinician, you need to be a great educator. And I was like, well, you know, I don't know, can I do all that? And so I view a lot of those decisions early on that they, in my mind, it was just like, you know, canoeing down a river. And I was just sort of going with the current, and the easiest way was just to keep going. I would say the time when I became more cognizant that I actually need to be deliberate about it and think about it was when I was asked to sort of get heavily involved on the academic side. And that's when I really had to, I did sit down and think, and at that point talk with my wife about, okay, is this what I want? Is it aligned, as you said, aligned with my values? Is it going to give me joy? And that was sort of the first time that I think I really made a very deliberate choice. And I think that had a tremendous impact on my professional identity. But I'll bring up another fun term here, because almost since that time, I think I've felt more imposter syndrome than ever before to this day.
Oh, wow. I want to revisit that, but I want to get Carla's thoughts on when she first started to consider her professional identity.
And I love that teaser, Richard, about imposter syndrome for your authentic self. That'll be interesting. So I had a funny conversation with, or a fun conversation with my nephew a couple weeks ago about when you become who you will become. And, you know, I think for me, I was the teenager that went to all of the elderly folks in the neighborhood and helped them out, and was always doing things for people on my paper route. And, you know, there was just this sort of service component. And I think that identified, or sort of, that's how I identified. And then medicine just became the vehicle that met the interests as I went along. I clearly liked science, but I also loved reading, and I liked languages. And I think, you know, as I loved your questions, as I experimented with things, I just kind of kept coming back to medicine as that very direct service and interpersonal. And then orthopedic surgery was a surprise. I had planned and had my rotations and my applications in for a different specialty, and then I, at the urging of a friend, did a rotation and realized that experiencing the hands-on was a good match. And I think that I was lucky in that way. I found it before I matched in something else. And then I think, you know, as I've gone along, my identity, I love your values. I have mine framed on my desk. Some of them are the same. I think I don't always identify as certainly a surgeon or physician first. I sort of think of the other things that I position myself in the world as appreciating, giving more than I take, that kind of thing. And then medicine and surgery is the fun vehicle. But I think that actually has helped me in times when the medicine is frustrating, or in transition times, and kind of a good addition. But I don't think I would say I'm a healer. I think I'm more of a companion and a coach, and medicine is the way that kind of comes about.
So that's interesting. So you kind of identified service as a core value early, whether or not you recognize that's what you were doing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Well, let's jump back into imposter syndrome before we get too far down the line. I find this to be an interesting topic all the time because we call it a syndrome, which implies that it's an individual issue. And I'm interested to hear from each of you on how you feel about that. Do you feel like imposter syndrome is just about the individual, or what other factors do you think are at play? Go ahead, Richard.
Well, you know, in my case, a lot of it has to do with the fact that I've taken a very, you know, sort of atypical path towards, you know, having roles in an academic medical center. You know, at the moment I'm, you know, chair of a department of plastic surgery, and I'm interim chair of a department of physical medicine and rehab, and I'm chairing a task force on well-being. And the main thing is sort of when I was first asked to come in and develop a plastic surgery group at the university, and we were, you know, as a division at that point, I'd only been in private practice. And I was sort of handed that and handed a residency program. And, you know, I guess when I look at the people that I know around the country who have these kinds of jobs, they've been very deliberate and very political often in how they would get to that point. And I sort of followed instinct. And so I guess the imposter syndrome part, I sort of look and I think, I'm just not really sure how I got to this. I don't feel an imposter in that I don't feel that I don't deserve it, that I don't, that I'm not capable. But it's more, it's so far beyond where I ever thought I could get in those realms. You know, within surgery itself and with my patients, I feel mostly wonder still, which I think is sort of one of the reasons that I've stuck around for a while, is I feel wonder that it still blows me away that people are trusting enough to let me come at them with a knife. And, you know, that the joy that you can see in people, you know, afterwards when things work well, and sometimes, you know, even when things don't, you know, I don't feel like an imposter, but I feel like, wow, it's like pretty crazy that I've been allowed to have a career in this.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what are your thoughts? I saw you smiling earlier.
Well, I think, you know, and I try and share it a little bit from my perspective. Ironically, you know, one, the term didn't exist when I was young in my career. And I think in a way, many people treated you like you were an imposter, that you needed to earn this in a way that they prescribed and not necessarily anyone else deciding this. And, you know, fortunately, getting through that and getting in, but I think a lot of it is the message you're told. And I think where I feel an imposter at times, as I think I understand it, it's where people say, well, you can't do that. Or, yeah, just more like you can't do that. And to me, fortunately, I built up enough of a resistance to that actually almost drives me more when somebody says I can't do something. Now, it's one thing I now do better where you can't do that. I also have to decide if I want to. If I want to and they say that, then I'm really driven to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you about the messaging. I think that, you know, even when we are intentional about defining what we want to do and who we want to be, we do receive messages from the environment that tells us that it's not valid, right? Like, you're not academic enough, Richard, or you can't be a coach, Jeff, or whatever it is. It's kind of an interaction, if you will, between the environment and yourself. And I do think that going back to that intentionality about your professional identity is what can kind of keep you afloat. I think that's what's probably keeping you afloat, Jeff, when you say, when people tell you you can't do it, it's because you have a core idea of who you are and what you can do first. And going into those same scenarios without having that professional identity kind of defined or thought about, I think that makes it a lot easier for you to be susceptible to feeling like an imposter or feeling like challenged by those kind of statements. What are your thoughts, Carla?
I'm sort of musing on the growth mindset that is kind of required for every step along the way. And then and I think I had imposter syndrome less when I was younger. I sort of had the faith, well, I can learn how to do this. I'm not expected to be accomplished yet. And then you sort of get trained and into practice and you get proficient and you sort of hit maybe the top of your stride, and you don't have to read for cases, and you've seen a lot of things, and there's less of a challenge and less of a growth. And there's a little bit of what next? Or if I'm not growing, what am I? Does this still fit with my identity of myself as improving and pushing my own limits? And I think that's when people learn new techniques or sort of transition or switch to doing different things, or there's probably somebody that just hits their stride and does the same thing, and that's satisfying. But for me, that sort of makes me think, what is my meaning? What new thing can I progress in?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things I think about a career in medicine, is that the ceiling is relatively low with respect to what we do, right? Like a new surgeon in practice physically does the same stuff that somebody 20 years in practice does. And it's up to you almost to find what is your new challenge, or what is going to continue to stimulate you and support those core values that you identify early on. I think that's a struggle for all of us. And I'd be interested in hearing from the panel how your professional identity has changed over time. And then for context, can you tell the listeners how long you've been in practice?
Well, let me make one comment that I really enjoyed the material that you shared, because I think that really even small parts of that have huge value. Definitely, if you're going to do a really deep dive, kind of taking that big picture as you outlined would be fantastic. And I think that for sure, recognizing certain aspects of your identity, like Carla identified, service is a big component. And I think for me, similar, I phrase it differently. But I think those really, like you said, are really important through going through tough times. And those tough times can be in kind of all those phases: early career, forced or potential change, and even choice like stagnation. I think that some of my identity as a busy, respected orthopedic trauma surgeon that took on tough cases that other people didn't want to do. I guess that's kind of one way to phrase what I think maybe my identity was for a while. That I sort of recognized that it didn't really allow me to enjoy other values in my life, and other things that I wanted. And I enjoy, I'm a little bit of a ADD or whatever. I like to stay busy, but I don't necessarily like to stay busy just working. And so, that's an example of a transition that I made, is knowing that I wouldn't want to keep doing this, but I'm in my stride now. I don't want to abruptly change it, but I want to see how I can prepare myself for that change in the future when I'm prepared to make that transition.
Okay, I'll go. So I've been in practice more than 30 years, and I don't like the term retirement because it doesn't feel right to me. Part of it is very personal. I saw my father, who was a family doctor. You know, the graphic that you showed with your professional identity and personal identity, with the professional identity being a small, a component within the bigger circle. Well, with my father, it was when his professional identity was somewhat taken from him because of some health things. He was left with like a big hole. So I've been very conscious of that. And so, I'm viewing the fact that I'm slowing down in terms of the amount of surgeries that I want to do and the complexity of the surgeries. They're different than they used to be. I was very much like Jeff, give me the craziest, hardest, weirdest cases, and that like really excited me. I heard a thing on NPR yesterday. It was a British neurosurgeon was talking about his retirement, and he said, or when he stopped doing surgery, not retirement, but when he stopped doing surgery, and he said, it's like being at a dinner party. You never want to be a guest that overstays your welcome. And sort of, that's the way I feel about it. So I think my professional identity keeps evolving and keeps changing. And I don't feel sort of married enough to my identity as a surgeon that when I stop operating, that there's not going to be a professional identity that is still satisfying. It's just going to be different. So that's the way I'm thinking about it.
Carla?
Yeah, I heard that interview too. And the other part that sort of rung with me was his quote that every surgeon carries a graveyard within us. And we typically revisit all of the bad things and forget about the positives. And I was thinking, as you transition from operating, if that just gets applied to other things in your life, they're not as dramatic, but poor surgical outcomes is just one way in which you can have challenges and obstacles. And I'm trying to think how am I different? I've been it's like 22 years now. I think I am less patient for the things that don't align with my values. I think I am more confident in advocating for patients and for kind of marginalized populations than I was earlier. And I think the conviction is the same, maybe the fear of friction or not advancing or not being part of the club was a barrier previously. I think I am the same inside. I'm just more confident and vocal about it now because I can be.
Okay. So it sounds like you've had growth with respect to your confidence over time regarding your core values, essentially, and how that plays out in this vehicle called surgery.
Yeah. I think both within it and around it too.
Mm-hmm. And then what I hear Richard and Jeff saying is their priorities changed over time. And as their priorities changed over time, what they do changed over time. Does that sound right? Yeah, I think it's interesting as a younger surgeon on the panel, I'm in year 9. For me, my professional identity changed abruptly, like with burnout, essentially. I was in an environment where I really wanted to be kind of the triple threat academic surgeon that everybody talks about, but really started to recognize that I didn't like the environment and the requirements of what needed to be done to do funded research and to stay in this particular environment. Like Carla was saying, compromising care for underserved populations, that was a big trigger for me, but also kind of the whole grantsmanship and all that goes along with trying to be federally funded, really challenged my core values of integrity and quality, and really forced me to consider how much I wanted those things versus how much I valued the things that I said I valued. But it's interesting, you feel it almost physiologically, right? Like when you have this tension that things aren't aligned, and burnout forced me to reconsider. So I was lucky enough to be able to take 6 months off to really just stop and be very intentional about, now I'm not in academics, now I'm not doing research or teaching. What is my new professional identity going forward? And how do my core values carry on to that new professional identity? So I think you can do it. You know, you have changes in your professional identity that are intentional, and then you have some that are natural, like Carla's, and then you have some that are more abrupt, potentially. I mean, for me, it was scary at the time, right? Like these guys were saying this was a 10-year plan carrying out that suddenly changed. But having the time to take stock of what my core values were really helped me reset. I kind of wonder, though, what would it have been like if I had thought about those core values earlier in my practice? What do you guys think your careers would be like if you had at least preliminarily defined what your core values were, what your purpose was at the very beginning of your careers?
So I'll answer. I think my gut on that, because I don't, obviously totally know, but my gut is that it would have been very different, because I look back, and even while I was going through my transition from academic to private practice, and when I was going through my transition from saying, I'll stay in the hamster wheel versus I'm going to reassess this and try to balance my values a little bit better, was that in retrospect, I think I very much met the definition of burnout. And I think it's just exactly what that definition is, and what you're highlighting, that when your values don't match, then you experience burnout. Burnout's healthy because it's actually showing you the mismatch. And so if I would have done it the other way around, I think I would have avoided the more extreme sensation of burnout. I would have actually just noticed the little ones, because I do notice them now. When I feel that, I'm more likely to reassess, like, am I doing the things I actually want to do, or am I at least doing mostly the things I want to do? And I don't know, it would have probably been a different path, but it may still have been that I would have stayed then in academics, because I would have navigated that much better. But I don't know. And I can kind of look back now with way more freedom. And again, I think you highlighted that in the introduction, that just because you think you want to do something, if as you're getting there, you decide, hey, this is kind of nice, but okay, but I actually think I want to do something else. Like, just knowing that freedom to shift, I think is so empowering. And I like that, because I like the idea that you don't have to do it just because you made it, a decision 5 years ago.
Carla?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of incorporate the question that's in the
yeah, I was gonna jump to that next.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hold on then. Let's see if Richard has any comments on that original question, and then we'll jump to the question in the chat.
Okay.
The only comment I'd make is I like very much what Jeff was saying. I think that what would have happened for me if I'd identified those core values earlier. I would have done more experimentation. Whether I would have ended up in the same place that I am now or not, but I because I didn't really think about them, I just sort of moved along the easy track that was in front of me, and so I think it would have empowered me to explore more and maybe take my time rather than sort of rushing to try to get to out in practice and that sort of thing.
Got it. Carla?
And I, just to reiterate that, I loved your point about urgency, that if you're feeling urgency, it may be you're misidentifying that as anxiety or some other, I think incorporating the question, and I'll read it, is request to talk about our experience as young surgeons at the beginning of our career, especially with respect to imposter syndrome and feeling comfortable. And I think that I recently had a colleague who opened up about suffering tremendously from this during residency training. And one of the things that I think is true then and also early in practice is that your ability to see the cues and get feedback gets a little bit skewed. And in her case, there was sort of a blanket expectation about how quickly you would develop proficiency. And she was able to identify the way she learned was a barrier, and changing that and allowing herself to understand her progress and feedback. And I think, with respect to early career surgeons, all of a sudden you're on your own. And, oftentimes the medicine part you're pretty well trained for, and the simple surgeries are simple, but the office politics or the group dynamics or the hospital politics are kind of mind-boggling. And that makes you begin to question, can I do this? Or you have a couple of complications and you think, I'm just a bad surgeon, everything goes wrong. And I think that's a place where your peers can help you, where finding the coach person, the colleague that trusts, that you can trust, that you can ask for, reflection of what you're doing. And then also kind of understanding and quantifying what success looks like for you. Is it number of cases? Is it a certain proficiency in a procedure? Is it, facility with an ACL reconstruction and how long that takes? Being able to quantify that gives you data. I don't think imposter syndrome is combated by data. I think it's combated by perception. And so part of that is better data for your situation. Part of that is reflection from colleagues around you, others that you've trained with. And I think we get very isolated these days. You join a practice and you don't operate together. You're flipping rooms in your own surgery center, and the collegiality has to be sought. It's hard to find somebody else who will take the time to work together with you. And I think that's true even in academics, where there used to be a little, maybe less time pressure. And that's hard, but I think it's well worth fighting for, and probably one of the secrets to, getting through those transitions, early career and post-training.
I love that. I think that another thing to think about, though, is figuring out what you actually are suffering from. I think too often we apply the label of imposter syndrome when that's not really what it is. So self-doubt is natural, and all of us have it. And some of that is mitigated by experience, but not all of it, right? Like I still question things all the time at 9 years, and I'm sure people older than me still have some of those doubts. The key to managing self-doubt can be managed. Imposter syndrome is a label, right? Managing self-doubt to me comes from, one, having some level of self-awareness, but also managing the environment around you. Most of us are not born with an impression of ourselves, right? Like what you think of yourself comes from the environment around you. And managing that is more within your control than you think, right? Yes, we all work in maybe competitive environments and competitive groups or departments where we feel challenged by that environment, where we feel those messages that we should be better than we are, or that we're not as good as everyone else. But it is possible to curate an environment around you that helps with that. For me, I have kind of a personal advisory board, right? Like I have other surgeons who do what I do, that we talk about the specifics. And then I have surgeons that may not be in my specialty or subspecialty, where we talk about the bigger picture feelings of how to deal with politics or self-doubt or all of those things. So kind of keeping a crew of cheerleaders around you can help, but also avoiding things that can be avoided. So much of the trauma we experience in our career is actually optional, despite what we think. Like we kind of like find ourselves in these situations and we feel like it's toxic, right? Like this meeting is toxic or these group of people are toxic, but then we keep going back to them. Figure out which one of these things are optional so that you can protect yourself. We kind of think that the people ahead of us believe in themselves naturally, but self-belief is actually fostered, and it's fostered not just by you, but by managing the energy around you.
Yeah, let me make one other comment about at least the sensation of doubt and or imposter syndrome, right? That it's just so common that we don't really give ourselves a truly fair representation of where we should be at. Like when a resident feels self-doubt, there's so much background experience that can be incredibly different between one resident to another. And Carla highlighted another example of how we learn can be different. And if the model in which we're forced to learn isn't the model we learn best, then we're gonna, by nature or by our personal ability to learn, come at it potentially slower or faster depending upon our learning style, right? And so I think, I don't know what percentage, but I have a theoretical percentage of how much of that is really just bringing the perspective where there's grading things or evaluations of this person's functioning at the level of a R5, or this person's functioning at the level of someone 5 years in practice and they're 2 years in practice. And therefore that's the new measure, right? Like now everybody has to feel that way and be at that level. And I just don't think that that's realistic. And I don't actually think it's that healthy. We should just be comparing to, are we getting better? And are we getting more and more competent? And once we reach competency, are we becoming more and more proficient? And there's even down dips in that for various reasons, right? Because techniques change, our health changes. Again, that's just, I think those are things that you can reassess with either the team that you've created or a coach or people like that.
Richard, any thoughts as somebody who trains residents? And
so our group has sort of grown. Initially we were 2 surgeons and we're now up to 14 or something. And one of the things that I've really tried to foster in everyone has been that feeling of family and feeling of support. It's the comparisons that people make to each other, as Jeff was saying, those are really difficult. I've got some surgeons and I have some residents who are able to operate like a violin, expert. And then you've got others that are just a little more workmanlike. One is not necessarily better or worse than the other. They're just different. So I think it is really important for us to be very conscious of the language that we use. You know, the question about, you know, for younger surgeons, it is so important to have people to talk to lean on, to ask questions, because, you know, you do have all of these, you know, fears and concerns when you're in whatever form of medicine, because it's all high stakes when we're dealing with patients. So that's the way I've sort of tried to approach it. Sometimes successful, sometimes, you know, not as successful.
Well, it's top of the hour, and I want to thank each of you for being on this panel and having this discussion with me. I've enjoyed it.